Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are going to do our next section on the GCSE history revision about the medicine topic today. So we're going to look at the first section about the Western Front now. I'm just going to focus on these first three questions. So the two features question, the how useful question, and then the strange question, how do you follow up question, which we'll do at the end. So the two features question, really, the hardest thing about this question is to kind of understanding what does it actually mean. So if somebody said to you, right, explain two features of this car, we say it's red, it's a Ferrari, it's got wheels, windscreen wipers, etc. That'd be quite an easy thing to do. So once you understand what you're doing on this question, it's fairly straightforward. So the difficulty here is they could really ask anything about any of the features we've looked at in our knowledge. So I was going to use an example here about trench foot. So, one feature of trench foot was, obviously it was caused by standing in waterlogged wet trenches. It would cause gangrene, the blood supply would stop, they had to amputate feet and toes, and they would try and overcome this by giving them like whale oil and something like fresh shocks wherever possible, build duck boards to raise above the water level. But, trench foot was a serious issue within the trenches. But, I've tried to think of all the different things they could ask there, but, the list is fairly endless. So I'll just go into a specific example now. So this is about the chain of evacuation. So just remind you what this is about. So, if a soldier was injured, the first stage of this would be they'd be taken to the RAP, the Regimental Aid Post, which is really literally, a few hundred metres behind the line, very close to the front line, where they had stretcher bearers bringing in the injured soldiers with a medical officer, and they would perform basic first aid. If they're more seriously injured, they'd be taken further back, about a mile away from the front line, to the dressing stations, or the ADS, the Advanced Dressing Station, or the MDS, the Main Dressing Station, and there they'd give them a little bit more detailed care. And then even further behind, they'd take them to the CCS, the Casualty Clearing Station, which was several miles from the front, so, safe from attack. And this was staffed by doctors and nurses, and they could provide a much more comprehensive healthcare. And even better than that would be at the base hospital, which were often on the coast, on the channel, so they could ship them back if they needed to, back to the UK. So lots of medical staff, and they even began to specialise in certain areas, certain injuries, eye injuries, leg injuries, etc., because they could perform more advanced medical care. So it could really be about anything, this question, but as long as you stick to, what is the feature of something. So on to the second question. So this is this how useful question. So they'll give you two sources. So it may be a photo, it may be a letter, a diary, an interview, or something like that. So I'm going to go through an example. So this question is about how useful are two sources about the effects of a gas attack. So it says, explain your answer using sources A and B and your own knowledge of the historical context. So first of all, we got a source here, source A, which is a diary written by this doctor here, Dr. Cushing, on the 25th of April 1915, and he worked as a surgeon on the Western Front. So before we even read through the text there, we can see that it's useful because it's a diary, it's personal, it would have been written by the doctor every day at the end of the day. So he would be quite fresh in his mind of the things and the detail that he's writing about. That's quite useful. He wrote it on the 25th of April 1915, which we know from our knowledge was made at the Battle of Ypres. The first time chlorine gas was used, it would have been quite shocking at that time, unfortunately. And obviously it's quite useful because I've put some question marks there. It shows us really a number of things and how fatal gas attacks were, the way that the poor guys died, and the symptoms of this horrendous attack. So, source A is incredibly useful in terms of helping the effects of a gas attack. And then they'd give a different source, in this case a photo. So it does, it's useful because it's quite visual. It shows the extent of their injuries. But obviously it's made at a different time, made in 1918 towards the end of the war. And they were at an ADS, an Advanced Dressing Station further back. So just to summarise that, so, source A is useful because it's a diary, it's personal from the doctor's point of view. However, you could say that it's obviously only one person's perspective on one sector of the trench. It's made at the time, during the Battle of Ypres. Obviously a surgeon would have been first-hand experience. So, if we looked at the detail, it shows us the high fatality rate, how painful, how painful it was for the soldiers, and obviously very, very detailed. So the context we've already talked about was the background knowledge about the Battle of Ypres. The photos are also incredibly useful because it's very visual. Also made during the war, at the end of the war in 1918. It literally shows us that the soldiers have been blinded. However, we could ask the questions about we don't know where it was taken, or it doesn't tell us where it was taken, and why the photo was taken. And we also know that by 1918 medical care had improved. So on to the last question, which is this question about, let's go back to the source A. So what would we follow up? So it's a 4-mark question. So all you need to do is write down 4 different things. So the detail I could follow up. So for examples, lots of different things, but I will say just off the first sentence there about the ambulances. So the question I would ask is, what type of ambulances did they use? What type of source could I use to establish that? Well, you could use an interview with an ambulance driver. How might this help you answer this question? Well, because obviously they would have an experience of either driving the ambulances or using the horses. So it's a fairly straightforward question. You just got to pick something from the text and then just follow it up, literally in the order of the questions there.